Okay, so the Hades and Persephone series by Scarlett St. Clair. I know that there's supposed to be at least one more book after the third one, but it isn't out yet and won't be for at least another year. So here's my thoughts on the other two books in the series that I did read. First off, after finishing reading the third book, I started to dread making this video, mainly because as I tried to think of what I was going to say, I realized that I had literally zero memory of what happened in the second book. Beyond the generic stuff, I mean. Persephone was dumb, Hades was horny, Demeter was evil, blah blah blah. Okay, so here we go. A Touch of Ruin. Um, hmm. Not even reading the summary about it on Goodreads tells me anything, mainly because the summary is a tell-nothing summary that doesn't even hit at the problems. And quite frankly, I feel like my lack of remembering what happened a good month after I finished it should probably tell you everything that you need to know. Not even a year after reading it. I marked it as finished on February 18th. I finished the third book on March 27th, which is when I wrote this up. Okay, so I'll start with a few things that I do remember. Apollo. Sybil was angry about Apollo, but warned Persephone to stay away from him because he wasn't like Hades. This is a guy that a lot of other women warned each other to stay away from. A lot of his ex-girlfriends were unavailable because they were dead. And as the running theme of this series is people telling Persephone not to do the dangerous thing, she does it anyway. And then she sits back amongst the chaos her life turned into and asks, consequences? What's that? So she wrote this article about Apollo being terrible towards women. He gets angry. But another running theme in this is barely an inconvenience. Much like with Hades, Persephone quickly finds a new friend in Apollo. There's literally no actual struggle, no learning moment in the entire thing. Persephone never faces any actual consequences, either for going against Sybil's instruction not to write the article about Apollo or from Apollo himself. He's just sad and misunderstood, you guys. Obviously, he can find redemption in his poor prior behavior simply by being friends with Persephone. Anyway, a big plot point of the second half of the book is that not too long after Persephone writes her article, Luxa gets into a big accident. She first thinks that this is the doing of Apollo. However, as it turns out, most of the time the gods don't really care that much about minor reputation damage. Although this was never actually addressed in the narration, I get the feeling that Lux's accident was just an accident. Persephone naturally freaks out and tries to do literally anything in order to heal her friend from her coma. Eventually, the day before her parents are going to take her off from life support, she makes a deal with Apollo to heal Lexa. However, right as he does this, some entity shows up and warns that Persephone has made a mistake in bringing Lexa back from the brink of death. But Lexa does wake up, and she seems fine at first, except for, the psychosis. But don't worry, lots of people have non-stop anguish screaming. That's perfectly 100% normal. But the doctors seem to think that there's no reason for Lexa to be in trauma therapy following a month-long coma and subsequent inpatient treatment. They sent her home, where she seems to be doing better back in a familiar environment. Until she kills herself because she can't take the agony of having been ripped from the underworld against her will. And still, Persephone. If you think that Persephone actually even began to understand what she did was wrong on so many levels, you've come to the wrong series, I'm afraid. She's belligerent and upset at Thanatos for taking her away, and even angry at Hades for refusing to help, despite the entire concept of death being explained to her like she's a toddler. And the thing that gets me about the entire business with Lexa is just, she's literally the girlfriend of the god of the underworld. She hangs out with the dead constantly. But the thought of Lexa being there, it was too much for her. So instead, the option she chose ended up with Lex's memories needing to be removed so that she could heal from what had happened. But because Persephone is an idiot who, despite multiple people telling her to leave it alone to let the entire thing play out as it would, she meddled and made it worse and made other people clean up the mess that she'd made because she's literally so incompetent that she can't even clean up after herself. And then a really random subplot that never really went anywhere was that the guy who was in charge of the paper that Persephone worked for is a mob boss. And then it turns out that Hades runs this other club where all the organized crime people come to hang out, and he's secretly in charge of all organized crime. This is literally so unimportant that it's never once brought up again. And I just thought that I'd throw that out there. Oh, and Dimitri, Persephone's boss from the first book, yeah, he once date raped a guy. I don't have answers. It was kind of thrown out there. And then Persephone continued to work for the guy for a while, even after finding that out. when she did quit, it was for a number of reasons, and the idea that she was working for a guy who had once date raped somebody was just kind of one of them. And then at the end of the second book, Persephone was randomly kidnapped by a guy who it turned out had been stalking her. Now, granted, the guy had shown up a couple of times, and he had tried to leave her little secret admirer presents, but the entire thing read like an absolute last second effort to sprinkle in something else for Persephone to angst about, because who doesn't love a good PTSD from being kidnapped and almost raped by a stalker? You'd think that something like that would be a huge point, especially as Persephone's PTSD persists into the third book. You'd be right under, I think, literally any other author, but Persephone's personality continues to come and go at the whims of the author and the demands of the plot. She only suffered nightmares about her kidnapping and near rape whenever the plot started to drag, and as A Touch of Malice progressed further and further, it was like the author forgot about Persephone's PTSD too, and it was literally never brought up again. The third book, since I literally just finished reading it, is a lot fresher in my mind. The dumb little details linger in my mind a lot more. The second book ended with Hades proposing to Persephone, and despite the fact that they were alone, Demeter somehow found the exact second this happened and started to make it snow, which would normally not raise eyebrows, but this is the middle of summer, which would cause quite a stir. In the third book, Demeter decides to punish all mortals over Persephone's choice by turning the entire world into an Arctic wasteland and blast the city with a non-stop blizzard, which, as far as the original myth goes, this is fine, I suppose. Even as early as the first book, there were mentions of an anti-god group lurking around, but this group starts to take the center stage in the third book. They brutally attack a minor god, Harmonia, using anti-magic devices to stop her using her calming powers over them. However, since Harmonia did survive the attack, she was able to tell Persephone that the magical signature over the net that held her down was like Demeter's. So, yay! Nothing quite like being the sugar mama of a terrorist organization. And then things get even worse when Persephone manages to find out info about another meeting of this group and watches as they torture and eventually murder another minor goddess. What's that? You want to know who the murdered goddess is? I literally don't remember, and in the grand scheme of this book, it honestly doesn't matter. She could have been Elizabeth Bennet for all that her role mattered. Meanwhile, as all of this is going on, do you want to know what's going on in the underworld? Hecate and Yuri and some of the other astrologers are trying to help Persephone plan her wedding, because when a terrorist organization is out there snatching people off the streets and throwing coffee on God, do you want to know what I want to be doing? Picking out what kind of cake I want for my wedding. Hades says that they can't officially get married until Zeus approves the union, but he's certain that it shouldn't be a problem. I mean, why would Zeus refuse when Demeter is out there freezing the homeless population and actively giving domestic terrorists anti-god weapons? If you're expecting Zeus to get up off of his throne in Olympus and actually do something to stop Demeter, boy, you don't know much about Greek mythology, do you? I'm disappointed, but not surprised by Zeus's inability to rein in the other goddess. Even after she's directly linked to the death of the minor goddess, who openly tells Persephone that she knew Demeter's magic was being used. And sure, Zeus does eventually prove the marriage to go ahead, but not without a huge warning for them not to have kids, because this prophet mentioned that the kids would be stronger than Zeus. Hades is worried that Zeus will take it back, so he and Persephone rush to the altar. Oh, and have I mentioned that every other page in the third book is the actual plot is interrupted so that Hades and Persephone can bang? Because it is. They literally just start breathing and the other one gets so turned on that his clothes start being ripped off. It was already getting pretty old at the start of the third book, but it somehow managed to make itself worse the longer the novel continued on. Eventually, all the snow results in an avalanche. Persephone goes to the site of the incident and randomly melts all the snow and clears the skies before she makes all of the flowers bloom again. Which, wow, some consolation to the friends and family of the dead. Look, pretty flowers at my dead aunt's house. But Zeus gets angry over literally melting the snow and growing flowers. He says that she's too powerful because she melted the snow, which, well, the dude would not like a flamethrower if that's his basis of power level. This sparks a literal battle between all of the major Olympus gods. Sure, Persephone isn't without her allies, but she gets the entire thing because Aphrodite ends up getting hurt pretty badly, despite Hades saying that Aphrodite's thread wasn't cut. Considering the running theme of anti-god weaponry, I wouldn't be so sure about that. Anyway, the book wraps up with Demeter sending her goons out to capture Sybil to use her and Harmonia as leverage to convince Persephone to do what she wants. Despite the goons seeming to be in charge, even when Demeter shows up, the guy is quickly brushed aside like a speck of dust that he is when Persephone and Demeter start fighting. Persephone ends up killing her mother using some of the same weapons Demeter would have used to destroy the order of the world. And although Persephone is upset over having committed matricide, I can't say that I'm sorry to see the end of Demeter. She was a horrible, abusive person who justified that every terrible action she'd done towards her daughter with the fact that she'd once been raped. Which, I'm sorry that happened to you, but you don't go around and psychologically abuse your own child because of what happened. And for sure you don't murder random other people who have nothing to do with anything. As I mentioned at the start of the video, there's supposed to be at least one other book set to come out sometime in 2023. A Touch of Malice ended with the goon of Demeter breaking the Titans out from their prison, so I guess that'll be the theme of the next book. Overall, this series is miserable, and every single chapter made me hate it more and more. Persephone was a whiny brat who literally never once learned from anything that happened to her. Never once. As I kept saying, her personality was stupid fluid and changed from chapter to chapter as the plot demanded of it. Even the things that should have carried over, like her PTSD, were nothing more than minor inconveniences, which were quickly brushed aside the second that the actual plot started to become more and more prevalent. Which says nothing about Hades. I mean, Persephone might be a wishy-washy moron, but at least she had a personality. Hades mainly just kind of hung around and was a walking toy for Persephone to use and to take her anger out on at times. Sure, he showed up to be angry at Zeus, but like you could have taken him out from scenes like that and nothing would have changed. There were enough people who had Persephone's back that he didn't even need to defend his wife against the other Olympians. And Hecate. Don't get me wrong, because I really like her character, but you could have replaced the basic role she played with Elizabeth Bennet and literally nothing would have changed. Literally nothing Hecate did had any sort of plot-driven aspect to it. Sure, she gave Persephone pep talks and taught her some magic, but Hades taught her magic and gave her pep talks too. And although there were long passages in which Hecate taught her how to heal herself for Persephone exploding fruit, I don't seem to recall anybody ever teaching Persephone how to melt snow or clear the skies. And that's just Persephone turning into an overpowered Mary Sue. Again, because the plot demanded it. Showing Persephone actually learning how to control her magic and getting the life lessons of what it means to be a god? Please. That would require character development, and we can't have any of that. I will keep an eye out for the fourth book, but honestly, I have a lot of stuff that I'm keeping an eye out for. I can't really make any promises. Besides, in my mind, Persephone killing Demeter is honestly a pretty sweet ending, all things considered. She not only stopped the bad guy, but also got her revenge for a literal lifetime of abuse. Besides, as you could probably guess, I'm not exactly eager to read more of the steaming pile of abusive, poorly written, zero character growth filled mockery of the original mythology.